Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to review a Drugstore Cowboy. How I had stumbled upon this movie is I would go on to watch a YouTube channel called One Bad Movie, hosted by Stephen Baldwin. He would go on to talk to his brother Alec Baldwin, and at some point, this movie had come up, and Alec would go on and give this glowing recommendation about the film and whatever have you. So, if you don't want to go on and specifically hear my thoughts about it, hear Alec Baldwin's, and and he'll probably be the definitive thing of whether you should check this movie out or not. I would go on to really say that this movie to me is to be rather interesting. We have these characters that go on to break into these pharmacies to steal these certain substances. And it's the interesting strategic parts of these crimes that are also to be actually fascinating, as well as also to see where these characters are to go on and head, and to say that the rationale for their substance use is clearly because of the fact that they have pressures of going through their day to day, like tying shoes and stuff could have so much pressure to them. Okay, all right. So we would have a character like Bob who, while continuing on doing this substance stealing activity, he eventually goes on to be living in fear. The fear of getting caught, the fear of superstitious things like fearing about anyone talking a dog or them having a dog or putting a hat on a bed, superstitious things of that nature. And while they're going on and they're doing crimes, how like bad things start to pile on, and Bob is to really get to a point where he's like, man, like, if I am to go on and be able to get out of this, then maybe I should finally just realize that I should probably just turn my life around. And maybe I should go on and just work at this drill bit job. Which immediately when I saw the drill bit thing, I'm like, oh yeah, drill bit, yeah. Like I have gone on to have to physically move a drill bit thing like that is in this movie, and good God, is it awkward. I don't want to complain that it's heavy. It's just the most awkward thing to freaking move around. It is just so like wobbly and yeah, like it's so hard to figure out where to grab. It's so rigorously difficult to try to figure out how to exact a way to have that be a thing that people should ever buy and have in their own personal homes. But I'm sure people have them. So, but back to the film here. So we focus on Bob, and it seems when he's trying to clear himself, he's withdrawing and he's going back to a normal 9 to 5. The more that he tries to separate himself from his old life, the more that his old life starts to creep back in on him. And eventually, the way this leaves off, the way it began, is to really just probably have us assume that Bob, by the end of this, probably is not going to go on and have a happy ending. To me, this movie honestly does go on and remind me of stuff like Requiem from a Dream. That's probably why I chose this movie also, because it's quasi similar to that. as far as its substance use, and also how we have certain characters that kind of spiral out of control in that film in a very weird and goofy like manner. If you've never seen the movie, I think you need to check it out. If you are to go on and enjoy a movie like this, that movie, like with the whole refrigerator thing, and yeah, that thing kind of just gets really off the handle and really bizarre and interesting in certain natures. But anyways, after that, I think we would just chuck in any seemingly narcotics movie that you've probably ever heard of in your life. Because yeah, that would make all the sense in the world, or any kind of just thief like movies that are to go on to have these certain jobs put in. Yeah, like eventually we'll get severely lost in the weeds of whatever else I can go on and just kind of chuck in here as a possible tag for this film going into the future. But anyways, this movie is good. It's available on Tubi, TUBI. Check it out. I would recommend it. It is entertaining enough. And I would say, yeah, go out of your way to watch this movie. Check it out. And by all means, I think it's about that time to just push into full on breakdown of this movie, scene for scene, moment for moment, and get everything out that I, without a doubt, would go on to feel about this movie. I also had gone on to watch the making of said film, and I think most of what they go on and they talk about in the making of is kind of just very generic. They go on and they just kind of beat for beat just kind of describe the film to you, and each one of the actors just kind of describe their character and see how they feel that their character is to really go on and be to them, which I am to probably get my kind of impact of what I am to go on and say, maybe from mostly Matt's character. But anyways, when kind of thumbing through that as I was trying to do, because it's like a 30-minute thing, which I'm like, dude, I already spent X number of minatos on this thing, and I'm like, like, so I kind of just pick and chose kind of what I was to kind of adhere to and really pay attention as logically as I could afford to go on and spend time with this. But anyways, like Heather Graham was going on and talking about her makeup when eventually she has the wrapping up of her character the way she does, and how it disgusted her. I was going and like, all right, that's an interesting bit of little tidbit or what have you. And Matt going on and talk about the fear of his character, but also the adrenaline rush and so on and so forth was kind of rather interesting to kind of pull from that. But anyways, let's push on and full on breakdown. It is about that time yet again to, of course, go into spoil time. Spoil time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. Let me know in the comments below what is your favorite substance movie. Take it from the very first half of the first word here, and let me know what is be your favorite DRUG kind of movie, because I'm sure there is probably a number of those existing out there. I am to probably go on and look at like the Demi Moore movie, like The Substance, and that is seem much more of like a science fiction, whatever kind of a thing that is to not be so similar to this, but also it kind of like is a thing that goes on and eventually ruins that woman's life. And at some certain point, we kind of have some things to compare to. But anyways, uh, let me know also in the comment below what is to be your favorite, like theft or thief film, because maybe you are to go on and have one of those in your life, and that'll be something that'll not only to be something that I may check out in the future, or also to be just something you can share. So maybe other people who were to go on and check out the comment section also could find that and to be like, oh yeah, I remember that movie, blah blah blah. Either way, I appreciate anybody going on and viewing and watching this movie or viewing and watching this video because I do really hope that any of these projects can go on and help you just find something to go on and enjoy in your own very specific way. So with that said, let's go on and let's pause here. I will get on my cast list where I insist is to go on and help me go on and rattle this movie off. Because, yeah, I really actually didn't, surprisingly, enjoy this film. Because I was thinking, like, is this all going to just be about the substance use and just them going through and breaking into all of these pharmacies? And honestly, no. Like, it seems that there is, like, just a change up that kind of goes on when they go from, like, pharmacy to hospital, or hospital, as I always like to say. And the eventual realization that finally Bob comes into of just like, hey man, like I've had enough. So with that said, I think it's about that time to have enough of all this and just push into full on spoilers. Thank you for watching this because I know a lot of people may go on and make their way out at this point, but thank you for going on and listening to this however you wanted to digest this because I do appreciate it. I really do. Like, I really hope that this helps somebody. And it is rather interesting to go on and see certain people who are to uh, talk about certain things that have gone on to review lately. And, like, that's all I ever wanted to have these videos do is to help people better figure out a film. Like, it's not anywhere of me just to like, oh yeah, this is a business, this is a none of that stuff was the reason why I did this. It was all about like, hey, like I know about this film, I hope someone else is going to know about it too, and either share our enjoyment of this movie or share our disappointment of it, or really just therapeutically just get out what we thought about it. And either that or like it just helps another person with how I talk about it, just kind of better figure out whether or not people should check this movie out. But yeah, kind of very much just over explaining everything. But anyways, let's pause here. Let's get everything out. All right, everybody. I apologize already. I feel like I should probably state this. At any point, if I'm going on and talk about this film, if ever there is to be at a point where I yawn, because I'm probably sure I'm gonna get very tired here. It's feasibly because I am to kind of be doing this very much later than I honestly have should, as well as also I've kind of been spending a lot more time kind of looking into uh, and researching things more than I probably should because it's kind of the holiday season right now. I kind of have a certain kind of frame of things that I'm just kind of looking at as far as things to just kind of check over, and also there is to be just a number of just kind of movie and show stuff that I'm kind of researching right now to try to figure out what is to be the best thing to just kind of push on from my day to day. There's a possibility as far as maybe like future reviews. I am kind of tempted to check out Predator Badlands right now, even though like that movie just has the weirdest, goofiest visuals. But I surprisingly think that there are a lot of people that are going on and giving positive, seemingly notes to that film. So I don't know. Maybe it's a temptation for me to go on and actually continue to do new releases because honestly, it's fairly rare for me to go on and actually do so. I am to also to be tempted to cover the Running Man remake, and I think that did actually come out within this week. So I probably will go on and do that fairly soon, realizing that it is to be released. And to me, I was to also check if that was out, so I gotta scramble to see if that is actually available, because I do want to go on and see that film. So there is to go on and be technically some future reviews for you, for me to talk about at some point, as well as also there is still like a number of projects that I haven't much talked about here that I guess I could talk about them now. Honestly, there is to be the very first VHS movie that I am just kind of tempted to cover, simply because of how VHS is still surprisingly a viable thing that people still talk about as far as collecting it, whatever. So it could just be really tempting to just want to review the VHS movie. Also, I'd gone on to just kind of see movies that have VHSs in them. As far as like recently, I reviewed Remote Control, so it's just kind of a bit of nostalgia to go on and talk about VHS tapes and stuff like that, but also going on and further doing movies that are to also have that connection and have some found footage thing of an idea for that film is kind of rather interesting to me, just because I like the whole found footage idea. Other than that, yeah, I think I will probably just go on and just rattle this movie off. So, the very beginning of it, we have Bob's character, and he's seemingly in this gurney being ushered to this hospital by this ambulance. And we have Bob here who talks about how he is wants to have been shamelessly a dope fiend. So the reason why this is to be once was him needing to go way back to the start of this all about how he came into this crew, and he'll go on, he'll talk about each one of them. He would go on to, of course, talk about Diane, who is to be seemingly his lover, who grew to enjoy and enjoy a certain substance of which that he is to go on and to have enjoyed also, and then to come in to find Rick, who kind of just have become his muscle, his sidekick, and then of course Rick having Nadine and kind of talking about her as just kind of like, well, she's Rick's old lady, and like it seems also really interesting how Bob and Nadine, like we see throughout this film, to the point of course, what happens to Nadine. Like the two of them are also just kind of a bit of odds between one another. Either one outsmarts the other, or one does something stupid, and to kind of see that dynamic or arguments that kind of go on. And so after we have Bob that starts to describe his whole crew, he would go on to say that he would feel that this crew would just kind of feel like comparative to like a son, and how he's kind of nurturing this as if like he's really to hope that it grows into something bigger. But he also knew that this wasn't going to last forever, or that there's only so long that they can get away with actually continuing on this path of pharmacy thievery. So we go to Portland, Oregon in 1971. We make our way into this RX pharmacy, as the first character that enters it is Bob. Bob goes on and starts to make his way. We start to see through the reflection of this seemingly thing that, of course, behind it has this mirror, or mirror. This mirror that goes on, and behind it has this camera, is what I wanted to say there. So Bob makes his way into the sunglasses as other people start to make their way also into this pharmacy. We have Diane, who makes her way through the aisles. Then we have Nadine, who makes her way to the comic books. We see Fantastic Four comic books. We see Defenders comic books. Some Marvel stuff here. And then there's also certain things that I can't quite recognize. There's also Avengers here. I saw that. All right. And then eventually Rick will follow. So all these people start making their way through the bit of store here. Diane is to go on and ask about chewing gum, and it is to be the gum that they don't have. Nadine is to be at the comic book shelf, and then all of a sudden is to fall over and make it look like she's having a seizure. Making it look like, because we'll find out that she is going on and faking this. So that way the pharmacist will get from underneath his counter, rush to Nadine, try to figure out a way to help her. And while that's going on, we have Bob scrambling to make his way into the pharmacy so that way he can go and rifle through these cupboards or these drawers to get the drugs that he needs. And while Bob is going on and doing that, we would, of course, have the other people going on and be put as kind of distractions. When the pharmacist gets back up and realizes, like, well, hey, I should probably go on and I should probably just call the authorities to get an ambulance here for this woman, this pharmacist then turns to see Diane there, and she goes on and starts talking about cough syrup. And the pharmacist kind of pushes her away so he can go and get to make this phone call. By the time the pharmacist makes his way back behind his pharmacy counter, Bob goes on and makes his way seemingly next to this exit door, so that way he can go on and kind of skedaddle out of there. we would have the pharmacist that goes on, makes a phone call, of course, explaining that there is a woman there who is to have seemingly an epileptic seizure. And so the next thing we see is Bob making his way to the car as certain others are to start to follow, as well as also Nadine just getting up and just kind of trotching back out of the store, and all the other Rick and Diane are to go on a leave. So Diane goes on and asks Bob, it's like, well, how well did we do? And he's like, so so. So we immediately have Bob, who, as quickly as he can, goes on to rifle through these drugs and finds one so he can get his fix. And Diane is kind of upset with Bob right away. I'm like, seriously, you're doing this in the car? And Bob doesn't care. He just wants to inject himself. So Bob goes on and starts talking about, while he's on his substance, how it feels, and how, like, he's willing to forgive his own worst enemy while he's on while he's on the substance. How uh, there's like a gentle explosion that occurs, and it goes in depth about all this, and and also kind of in the background we just kind of see these unusual kind of visuals kind of filling the space here. So as they all are to go on and make their way to the house, as they get out of the car and make their way to the house, we have Bob that goes on and tells everybody, hey, everybody act cool, act like you had just gone to church, because if anything, we don't want anybody suspicious thinking that we have something, like either from the cops or also from other people nearby who are just kind of itching to bargain with something. Specifically, we see off in the distance a guy named David. David goes on and kind of pokes his head out, like, oh, all right, well, like, let's see if those guys have anything, as he's going to go on and want to come to them to bargain. David has speed and he wants to go on and bargain with them with what they have. And Bob will eventually go on and sell to David morphine. But David ends up kind of popping out and walking over to this home. And there's a guy next to him that is just taking this knife as if this is the Sigourney Weaver movie Aliens, and taking the knife and he's putting in between his fingers. And I'm like, wow, okay, all right, like, that's a really interesting visual that's to kind of be put in place here. So as Bob and everybody go on and make their way home, they again are to go on and figure out a way to kind of shoot up here. And so they're specifically starting to divvy up who gets what, and it seems that Nadine is going on and complaining how she wants the real stuff and not just the blues or something just so smaller. Bob complains to Nadine. It's like, well, you didn't really do anything, so why should we give you anything? And like the further and further that there is to be this argument here, we do go on. We do have Bob give in and be like, well, hey, fair is fair. Like she did go on and she did help us. So yeah, like we'll go on and we'll not just give her like just the skimpiest of stuff. So we have a knock at the door, and so rationale is to have them be suspicious that it could be cops, but it isn't at this point. Bob goes on and answers the door and realizes that it's David. So it's like, all right, okay. So they let David in. They have guns freaking drawn. And so David is to go on and explain, oh yeah, I got speed. So Bob is like, okay, I think we can bargain with what we have. So at some point they're kind of bargaining and eventually they sell off the morphine in exchange for speed. And Diane and Bob are kind of off to the side. They're having this argument, and they're not really sure if they should really get the speed. And Bob is like, well, yeah, I definitely want speed because immediately after we get this, then we're gonna go on and we're gonna make our way to this hospital so we can get even more substantial drugs. And Bob goes way too hard about this whole hospital thing, about he's hoping that this hospital is gonna have so many substantial drugs and this and that. And it is kind of funny the more and more that Bob goes into this, the more Diane is wanting him to F her or sleep with her or be intimate with her. And Bob is just so focused about this whole like going to this hospital thing that yeah, like this woman is just throwing herself at you and you're just like, no, this hospital, this score, we gotta really get that. Like this guy is very tunnel vision focused. But anyways, so Bob goes on and makes his way back to David, and so they bargain. And once they start to go on and they start to break down the cost or the numbers of it all, we have Nadine that goes on and corrects Bob when Bob goes on and starts to say 75, and Nadine is like, no, 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 90. And Bob looks at Nadine and like, really? Like you're gonna freaking correct me in front of this guy? So right after David leaves, he immediately goes on and looks at Nadine and is like, don't you ever correct me in front of people. And that is to go on and immediately start to see that Nadine is eventually going to end up being like very hard to work with for Bob. And then like all they need to want to see her do is just mess up on something so that they'll definitely want to just kick this person off to the curb. So the next thing we see here is Gentry. Gentry is to be the narcotics division cop who is to go on and try to bust Bob here, as well as also his crew, but still kind of just summing up here. So Gentry is to make his way to specifically this pharmacy that had lost these drugs, and he is to kind of overhear things and hear witness testimonies and things of that nature. So Gentry immediately thinks that, oh, it's obviously going to be Bob, that I'm going to have to go on and bust again. So while Rick and Nadine are talking into another room, outside of that window, we see Diane, who's taking the shovel, and she's digging a hole, and she's dropping these drugs, and then she's burying it. It's like, that's pretty clever, because for how normally there is to always ever be a drug bust, they always go on and go into the house to try to figure out where the drugs are. Whereas they're burying it outside the house, no one's going to figure out where to dig to find specific drugs. So this is actually pretty clever, in my opinion. So they go on and they throw in a record here. And so Bob and Diane are starting to talk. And so Bob is talking about how at this hospital that there's a security of 0 and it feels very ripe for the picking, and he's thinking that there's going to be a big time amount of coke to go on and be involved in this hospital. And here is where Diane is just kind of thrusting her shirt open and going on and trying to tease her lover and kissing him and getting ever so close to him. And Diane is just trying to say, it's like, hey man, like, let's stop thinking about this whole hospital thing. Let's enjoy the fact that we already have gone on and have gotten this score. And also, like, Diane is just throwing herself at Bob, and he's not giving her the time of day. So all of a sudden, we have the cops burst into Bob's place, guns blazing. Gentry comes in, and now we start to see the cops tear this place apart. And it's really interesting the dialogue that is going on between Bob and Gentry, because in my mind, the focus thing here is them going on and talking about golfing. And Gentry goes on to ask Bob, it's like, well, hey, how well do you play? And Bob goes on and he talks about a handicap. And Gentry is like, well, where do you play at? And so Bob goes on and tells him where to play at. And it's like, well, yeah, like, people who play there are freaking pussies. So, yeah, no, don't play there. And also, like, the further and further that they just start talking and how people are starting to rifle through his clubs, Bob is saying, hey, yeah, don't break my clubs because, hey, I need to use them so I can work on my game. And Gentry's like, well, yeah, you need to work on your game. And I was like, what is going on here? This is hilarious. I'm like, they're going on, they're spending so much time on this whole golf club thing. And I'm like, what was the point of, like, them going on to this bit of rant between the two? Like, I guess Gentry has gone on to spend so much time with Bob at this point that, like, the two of them are like, yeah, we're gonna break into your and just thumb through all this stuff, but just to go on and talk about his golf game, I'm like, okay, like, I guess this is just uh Tuesday night between the two of them, that they've had so much interactions in the past. Then instead of going on and talking about what's really going on here, they'll just talk about just the common mundane things of just like, oh yeah, tell me about your golf game. So they're asking him like, hey man, just give up the drugs, just give up the stuff, just tell us where it is. And because Gentry is assuming that Bob will be hooked with this pharmacy theft charge, and the further and further they try to go through his place, they're getting nothing. So Gentry turns and looks at Nadine and asks how old she is. It's like, hey, is she over 18? Like, man, Gentry, you're just going on and trying to figure out like the most narrowest of crimes you can just kind of slap onto these people. And Bob is telling Gentry, no, 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 she's way older than 18. She's actually like 22 or older or something like that. So Gentry's like, ah, okay, all right. So oddly enough, both Rick and Nadine, like, to I guess both Diane and Bob, like, I guess they're seeing a lot of potential in these two people, and if anything, like Diane is to kind of play like the mother role, even though she also is to be playing the lover to Bob. But yeah, like, but it also is to kind of be weird to say that she's playing this mother role, where eventually she ends up with Rick in the later part of this film. But anyways, let's push on here. So we see the complete destruction and annihilation of this place, and so Rick and Bob leave here, and Bob goes on to tell Rick, it's like, okay, we need to get the heck out of here. Obviously, this place is like completely destroyed now, and also these cops are gonna keep knocking on our door to come think that we are to be involved in some crime somehow, and they're gonna barge in whatever they want to try to find drugs on us. So it's time for us to move. Also, it's really interesting how Bob goes on to state, man, it's great for cops like Gentry to exist because that kind of weeds out uh, their competition, which I thought was actually a really interesting kind of bit of dialogue to have there. So Bob turns to Rick and says that he's going back to his mother's place so that way he can get himself some new threads, some new clothes. So Bob and Diane make their way back to his mom's. And so when going on and having Bob make his way back to his, it's kind of interesting. The mother goes on and she takes her purse and she hides it underneath her furniture and kind of puts things in place for her to just kind of protect herself. The mother goes on and is to talk about how she assumes her son is going to go on and go to jail, and that if anything also it's just kind of really interesting how the mom is going on and assuming somebody's going to be knocking on her door one day to say that her son had died of some overdose. So the further and further this dialogue goes on, we do have Bob that gets clothes from the house. And the mother goes on and says, well, yeah, take everything. And Bob is like, well, I don't really need to because if anything, I'm kind of just getting a temporary amount of clothes now. and then eventually I'll go on and I'll buy more later. And the mother's like, oh yeah, I'm sure you'll go on, you'll buy more later, meaning you'll probably steal it. So Bob and Diane leave and they make their way to Josephine's apartments. So Rick takes Bob to this apartment complex, and Bob ends up asking, why is this called Josephine? And Rick is like, yeah, I have no clue. The guy that I talked to doesn't have that name. I guess it just sounded cool. So it's interesting as they are to go on and watch the TV here, because there seems to be a guy who was to talk about how he had gone on substances, and when doing that he had drawn his own self portrait and shows it on the telly of what it is to go on and be. And it's like, yeah, I guess so. So here's where Nadine goes on and asks Diane and Bob if they could have a little puppy. And Bob says that's not such a good idea. And then they have to go through the story of why that is not to be such a good idea. So Diane and Bob had gone on and done a prior crime, and they had done one with a dog named Panda. A dog named Panda? So, come to find out, this dog was to eventually, while they were doing this crime, accidentally run away. And Diane and Bob had written off this dog as like, oh yeah, like this dog probably ran off, got probably ran over by some car or some bus or something, and it died, sadly enough. But instead, what ended up happening is that Panda had ended up with a number of cops. And when this dog Panda had decided to go on and make its way back home, the cops followed it and realized that this was to go on and be Bob's place. And so Bob and Diane had gotten arrested because of this dog Panda. So that's why they never have dogs, which I thought was like, I don't know exactly how like a whole lost dog thing just ends up becoming that they end up getting caught, but it is actually just rather interesting and fun to just see that story, even though there could be just some logic gaps with it anyways. So Bob and Diane had gotten arrested, and the dog had sadly gotten put to sleep. So Bob is to say, yeah, we're never having another dog again. Even the mention of a dog will go on and give them seemingly a month's worth of bad luck. So after that, Bob goes on to explain, I guess, all the other cases of bad luck. And he goes on to say that bad luck could be tied to a hat, which is very weird. And Bob goes on to say, yeah, never put a hat on a bed. Immediately when you go on and realize that a hat is on a bed, that is even severe bad luck, or more severe bad luck. So Nadine and Rick are listening to this. It's like, okay, like you guys have some odd suspicions, but whatever. Like, okay. So we would go on shortly after that, And so Bob is going on and taking a needle to his arm. And Diane is mentioning about the whole bad luck thing. And maybe there were certain times where they did actually have bad luck, but it ended up also just kind of turning around to where that bad luck was just kind of the thing they needed, coincidentally, also at that same time. So Diane is saying that, like, the whole mention of the dog thing, as well as also them talking about the hat, like, maybe that doesn't mean anything, and maybe they should just go on and still do their job, or do their crime. And so they're also just trying to make sense of why they say these things are bad luck. And Bob goes on and it's like, well, hey, I've been doing this for a long time. And like when I do these certain crimes, like I am to kind of see the signs or get vibes. And so, yeah, so Bob is just very superstitious when it comes down to uh, feasibly just doing these things. And so, as Bob goes on and gets up, he accidentally goes on and he has this club and he's kind of whacking things around and he accidentally hits this lamp and he turns off the light and he apologizes to Diane for honestly kind of leaving him in the dark. So the next thing we go on and we see here is this RV that's parked outside. We'll find a guy that is be opening this bit of window in the RV to look out with these binoculars. And we'll find that he is with Gentry, and so the two of them are talking. And the one cop is talking to Gentry and just mentioning, like, hey, how about we just go on and we just plant stuff in his place and then we arrest him? And Gentry's like, no, like, I don't want to go on and just get some small possession charge. Like, no. Like, I want to go on and, like, I really want to get a bigger thing out of this. So, we have Bob who goes to the front door, and it seems to be fairly late at night. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning, I guess. So, this neighbor of Bob's, this old lady, this elderly old lady, she goes on and makes her way to Bob, and is to say to him that she is seeing a very suspicious man that is to be seemingly in this RV, and she honestly feels very like uncomfortable with this guy being out here. And she went on to think that she should go on and tell Bob about it for him to probably scare this guy away or do something about it. So Bob was like, oh, okay, well, thanks. So as the neighbor goes on and leaves, Bob immediately knows who is in this RV and is to be this kind of suspicious character. So Bob says, yeah, the person in the RV, that's Gentry. I know it. Like, this guy had followed us, and since he's going on and he's here now, and we have to figure out a way to kind of either get rid of him or scare him off, well, we're going to go on and figure out a way to F with him. So, Bob goes on to have this weird scheme of some sorts where Bob goes on to have this letter or this note that eventually used to be bred by Gentry. Bob goes on to figure out that if he puts this weird string at a certain part of this building, and this will be some kind of weird exchange of Bob trying to offer up this deal with this other person, that could go on and have Gentry come out of the woodwork and try to stop Bob from doing what he's doing. All while Bob is putting this in place, Bob is also talking to this neighbor nearby and mentioning to him how he had gone on to see this kind of unsavory character that is going on and maybe possibly being either a peeping Tom of sorts or just kind of doing something that this neighbor should kind of look into. And the neighbor's like, well, yeah, I'll look into it with my shotgun. And Bob is like, okay, all right, well. So Bob sets this stuff up, and so he's waiting for Gentry to make his move. So Bob is going on and opening up this window, like, hey, let's watch the show. Like, let's see what happens. So we'll come to find Gentry ends up going on and setting up this ladder. And the neighbor will go on and make his way outside with the shotgun and he will fire upon these cops. We have Bob who is like, oh my god, holy like, whoa. And he's all excited about how this whole trap thing and how it all worked. And then also we get this image of just Bob is all like laughing and excited or whatever, and we have these like glowing green like guns and stuff that are just kind of coming to frame here, which I just didn't quite understand what that visual was or why it continues to just happen throughout this film, like as if this is some kind of weird artsy movie. So the following day, we have Bob getting out of his apartment room and kind of looking to a certain side, and Gentry and a number of officers are all waiting for him, and they're pissed. Obviously, from what had happened the night before, but they're probably thinking that Bob has something to do with it. So they go on and they corner Bob, and they start to beat the crap out of him, and they torture him. And they go on and they bring back again about the whole like him needing to work on his golf game, but we have Gentry that goes on to say it's like, oh well, hey, yeah, you think you won the war, right? Uh, you're just a junkie that got one of my officers shot. As soon as he gets a hold of you, uh, or as soon as I get a hold of you, like everyone will realize you'll go on it and you'll no longer exist. Gentry goes on and leaves, telling his other detectives let him go after they kind of get their licks in. So uh, they leave, and so the next thing we see here is these presents that are wrapped up, and also all these drugs. So Bob goes on and is like, "Well, hey, like we can't go on and we can't live here anymore. If anything, I think it's about that time to start to travel and get out of town, get out of Dodge. So Bob goes on and takes a certain amount of drugs and puts them on this bus, as well as also like if they end up getting caught while they're driving in this car, they have this little hole in this car to kind of dump the drugs out. So that way they can kind of go onto this road trip and try to get out of uh, getting caught with these drugs on them. So we have the group, they're all driving to this other town and getting to this next spot. So they end up getting this truck. Bob goes on to explain to Nadine and Rick the reason why they got this truck alongside with their other car is because this truck looks like they're just these random farmers that have just come into town, and no one would probably think of them otherwise because they're like, well, hey, what would people really need with a truck here? So Bob, Nadine, and Rick, they go on and they find this nearest pharmacy, and they notice that above this door there is this window, and the window is kind of like cracked open. So Bob ends up telling Rick, it's like, well, yeah, we gotta use this window as a way to get into this pharmacy. So kind of give me a boost up. And so Rick chucks Bob over this door to get into this window so that way they can get into the pharmacy. Bob goes on and tells both Rick and Nadine to kind of meet him in the back. So Bob goes on and opens one of these drawers and uses one of the drawers of the shelving unit to go on and kind of house all the drugs that he can. Just kind of dump it in one shelf or drawer thing. So Bob ends up handing Nadine this drawer and says, "Hey, put it in the car somewhere." So Nadine goes on and is trying to figure out where to put this in this vehicle. She's thinking about putting it in the back of the truck. She's like, no, 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 no. And so she just opens the door of the truck and just dumps it all into the truck. And they end up all like scrambling into the truck. And the weirdest of things occur is like they all think that Nadine had done something bad, and I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. Like, could she have gone on and probably had a better plan for these drugs? Probably. But yeah, like what she did is what she did, and like I don't think there was anything other than like maybe her not going on and figuring out a way for her to fit the drugs still in this drawer and put it into the car would have probably been better. Because if anything, if they were to be caught, then she could go on and just chuck this one thing. And if they were to have gotten caught, there'd be drugs all over the car. That could have been the one, I guess, negative that could have gotten Nadine in trouble. But anyways, so they make their way back with to these substances to just kind of look through them, and they find one of them that is to be of coke. They're like, all right, like we can go on and we can definitely take this now and just kind of pass it around and start to have people take this, because I think Rick is the first guy who ends up getting a taste of this. Nadine, she's in her own separate room and she's crying because she knows that she's in trouble with these guys or with this group, and she's never going to go on and do another thing with them again for how untrustworthy she is against them. So Nadine is just crying all alone in her room. So we have Bob that goes on and looks up at the attic. There's this little attic door here. So Bob goes on to explain how he's going to go up to this attic of this hotel that they're in and store the drugs there, but not exactly around the attic door. If anything, it's going to be adjacent to another room to kind of have it be to where these drugs aren't so easily found, or that there's less suspicion on specifically them and maybe someone else around this area. So Bob sneaks up to this attic and is to go on and just kind of store away the drugs. So eventually we'll come to find that they're going to be storing more than just the drugs there, but I'll go on and I'll explain that a little bit later. So Rick goes on and meets up with Nadine while she's woo-hoo, and Rick is like, come on, Nadine, buck up. So Nadine is to go on and say, like, well, yeah, like, I blew it. It's a big deal. So Nadine is to say that, like, they won't ever trust her anymore, or they're going to try to get rid of her. And Rick is like, well, hey, you're with me. Like, I'm not going to leave you anywhere. So, like, if anything, like, we're fine. And Nadine starts screaming about Bob and how she's starting to call him a hog and this and that. And Rick is like, no, 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 no. You're just going to make things worse. So we have Nadine that goes on of like, well, yeah, like, also, like, it's kind of weird that they're very superstitious the way they are. And so I'm going to go on and I'm going to put a stupid hat on a bed and I'm going to show them right to their faces that them having a hat on the bed is not going to give us bad luck. So Nadine puts that on the bed and she wants everybody to go on and see that the hat's on the bed. And Rick is like, no, 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 like, don't have them see it. If anything, like, when we come back, you better not have that hat there. So we now transition here. We're at this hospital, and the security guard is just kind of around, and we have this nurse who's kind of reading this book. So Bob, Rick, and Diane, they get into this car, and Bob is telling Rick how, like, hey guys, like, whatever you guys are gonna do tonight, like, make sure that you, like, don't uh, go too far, don't get injured here, because Diane and Rick are gonna be the distraction, so Bob can go into the pharmacy, the hospital, and break in through there and try to steal drugs. So they're using these two vehicles and they're going into the parking lot and they're just trying to perform and get into these accidents that have these guards all rushing out to see what the heck is going on. Bob goes on and breaks a window and makes his way through this hospital and goes on to find a lot of substances. He then goes on to further need to make his way into this specific cupboard that it seems to have this lock on it. Luckily, Bob has this crowbar and he tries to break this cupboard and it's really just very tough. He's trying to figure out a way to just crowbar this off. Luckily, he has this crowbar here, otherwise he'd be effed. So While Bob is going on and taking a crowbar, we start to see people start to make their way through the hospital. And as Bob goes on and tries to leave the room, he ends up getting stopped by these kind of two orderly guys that are working there. And Bob gets into a fight with them and he breaks through another window and is now just kind of outside of the hospital, and he's on like rooftop, and so he makes his way into another window to try to figure out the best way to kind of just make his way out of this building because he's kind of still on the rooftop. He's at a certain level of this hospital. So Rick, Diane, they get into this car and they're kind of suspicious of whether or not that Bob is getting caught or not. And they assume that Bob would just be in and out and he'd be quick. Rick is having a suspicion. It's like, well, yeah, this is kind of unlike him. And Diane is like, no, like Bob is like a rabbit. Like he'll be fine. So Rick is also saying it's like, well, hospital, like this isn't the same as like the pharmacies. So maybe Bob will get caught this time. Now to Bob. Bob is going on making his way through the hospital and he makes his way into the women's restroom. Kind of makes sense is if anybody is going to go on and actually look for Bob, they probably won't look for him in the women's restroom. So Bob goes on into the women's restroom, goes to the bathroom stall after trying to figure out a way to bandage his wounds because Bob is bleeding on through his skull. I'm sure through a number of windows that he had bashed his way through. So Bob goes into the bathroom stall, and a woman is to be making her way to one of the stalls next to him. Bob goes on and lifts his feet onto the turlet, and it's just like, man, I'm probably gonna end up just kind of getting caught here. So time is to go on and pass here, so much so that like it's almost morning. Rick and Diane are to have waited for Bob for such a long time now that they are kind of really assuming that they got him, that Bob had gotten caught here. So Diane, Rick, and eventually Bob make their way all back. They're all fine. Bob didn't get caught. They make their way back to the hotel that they were staying at, and they find Nadine, and she's dead. R.I.P. Nadine. R.I.P. They find a corpse. You can obviously tell she's dead by the way her skin looks. So, also, Rick goes on and he touches her hand. And he's like, oh, she's cold. Yeah, she's a dead person, Rick. She's probably very cold because she's dead. She's been on the floor for a very long, uncomfortable amount of time. So, cold. Anyways, because of the floor being cold, Rick, that's why her hands were cold. It's not because she was dead. Whatever. Anyways, trying to make a joke here, and it just comes off as me just being more and more stupid. So, they're trying to figure out how she died. And Bob has an assumption that Nadine has been saving some stash to OD off of, overdose off of, and that's how she died. And so again, that is another bit of shade that Bob can just throw to Nadine as she's dead now, as well as also realizing that the hat was on the bed. And it's kind of funny that further and further that Bob talks to the group, he eventually is to be distracted by the hat on the bed. So he grabs the hat and he's like, "We gotta have that hat off the bed." So as Bob goes on and calls uh, Nadine a bit and kind of throws her under the bus, we would have Rick. It's like, well, hey, like she's dead. Like, don't say that about her. And the two of them kind of have this like argument and disagreement, and like they almost kind of get to almost blows as Rick goes on and he punches the wall. And so Bob goes on and is to remind Rick about, like, well, hey, she's the one that put the hex on us. That's why things are going as badly as they are now. So Rick goes on and makes his way back to Nadine, and Bob comes up with the plan that they're going to go on and stash Nadine's body up in the attic, like they were going to go and do with the drugs also. So that way they can figure out what to do with this woman's body in the meantime. And so Bob goes on, and this is really interesting to see how Nadine is to be kind of brought into the attic the way she does. Also, she ends up getting, when they have to pull her back out of the attic, how they just drop her is to be really funny also. So we go on to have Bob and Diane talking here, and they're talking about Nadine, and they're talking about TV babies, and that they've been watching people on television killing each other on the boob tube for so long. They think it's legal. And so, anyways, so all of a sudden there's a knock at the door, and Bob answers it. We find that the person behind the door is to be the guy that seems to own this motel, this clerk guy. So the clerk goes on and talks to Bob and states to Bob, "Oh, are you going to go on and be leaving today?" And Bob is like, "I don't think so." And the clerk is like, "Well, we have a problem with that because if anything, we've had this sheriff's convention that is scheduled to be coming here uh, tomorrow. And this place is to go on and be booked solid because of this whole sheriff's convention thing. So, if anything, yeah, you're probably going to have to go on and vacate because of this sheriff's convention." So, it is kind of funny because Bob is saying, like, yeah, this is the worst possible. Because he goes on, and after he kind of goes and leaves the clerk, it's like, okay, so Bob tries to go on and tries to tell the clerk, it's like, well, hey, in a couple minutes I'll go on and I'll go uh, to your counter and we'll kind of talk things out. We'll square things up. But so Bob goes on and talks to Diane about like, man, this is the most inconvenient possible thing. We're gonna have a boatload of sheriffs all coming here. Like this is the worst possible thing we can go on to do. And Bob eventually is to go on and get worried that at any moment there's gonna be some sheriff that just arrives to try to say, hey, I own the room, like, and kick him out. And they're trying to think of all the other scenarios of anybody that would go on and have this be better to have played out against, maybe Undertakers and this and that. So as Bob makes his way to the clerk's counter, he realizes he's starting to see all these sheriffs here. Bob goes on to make his way back to the clerk, and the two of them start talking. And Bob is coming up with some kind of excuse to say, like, oh yeah, my friend has a bit of the mumps. There's no way I can move him. I'm kind of worried. And the further and further they talk, there's no way that this is going to change Bob trying to just stay here. So Bob is going on in his head to imagine that he's going to go on and end up in jail and that he's going to get the gavel on him and he's going to be sent to prison forever. So Bob goes on to say to Diane, it's like, well, hey, we have this one thing of luggage that we can probably go on and put Nadine's body in, right? Let's use that to put her body in there and we'll just try to get rid of her then. We'll bury her somewhere. So Bob takes Nadine's body out of the attic, drops her onto the ground, and then goes on to put her in this sack. So so the next thing we see here is I think that let me pause here for 1 second. Okay. I just wanted to just kind of take a pause here to think about what I'm going to say here because I was kind of a little bit because I think this is an important scene to the movie, so I'm going to go on and I'm going to talk about this. So before they go on and they get rid of Nadine's body here, Bob and Diane have this talk, and here's where Bob goes on and he talks about the withdrawal program and how he wants to clean his act up. And Diane talking to Bob is like, well, hey, yeah, like, I'm sure, yeah, you can go on and you can clean your act up, but for me, it's not that easy. And also, Diane doesn't want to clean her act up. And so that's where it seems that the two of them are going to lead to their separation. That Diane is going to end up with Rick, as Bob is going to go on and go his own separate way and clean up his act and go on and get a normal 9 to 5 and just kind of leave this life. So that'll lead also to both Diane and both Bob will completely separate and they'll not end up together, which is sad. So the two of them make their way to this kind of forest out in the middle of nowhere. And Bob goes on and finds a place to have a shovel to bury this girl. And after he goes on and he does so, he will then go on and have him and Diane and Rick kind of go their separate ways. The next thing we'll see is Bob is in this bus and he's making his way home. Also, we had Bob that was while he was talking to Diane, he was mentioning that maybe that he when dealing out the drugs that they should give Rick like the bigger half because they're gonna go on and stop doing this whole job that they're doing anymore, and for Bob to go straight. And then that's when Diane is like, no, 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 like I'm not gonna go on, and I'm not gonna clean my act up. So that's when Diane just decides to go on it and just kind of leave with Rick here, for the two of them kind of just continue what they're doing. So Bob goes on and makes his way into finding his own place because he goes on to tell Diane that since Diane won't go on and leave with him, that all Bob needs is just enough money so he can make his way home. So he makes his way home, he has an apartment, and then goes in the withdrawal program and makes his way to this place to get counseling. And so he talks to this counselor. And this bit of dialogue is kind of interesting here because Bob is to go on and talk about how he's 26 and this is not exactly his first time with withdrawals because it seems that he's been involved with some substances throughout his entire life. And the woman starts asking him, it's like, well, are you married? Do you have kids? Like, do you have a job? And like, do you have a social security? And like, most of the answers are from Bob, like, all no's. So this woman goes on and asks Bob, it's like, well, have you done any felonies? And so eventually Bob gets more and more irritated where it's like, well, hey, do you want my whole life story? So Bob goes on and mentions how he's a junkie, how he likes substances, how it was to go on and fit into his whole lifestyle, and how is to kind of alleviate the pressures of doing kind of the day-to-day stuff like tying his shoes and so on and so forth. That was such a burden, I'm sure, to just tie your shoes every day. I don't even tie my own shoes. I just slip into my shoes, which probably isn't the best to go on and honestly do. But regardless, I just slip into my shoes, or I even have gotten just slip on shoes because I just don't really care to tie my shoes anymore. But anyways, so I guess that's one life thing that I don't really have to deal with. But it's also really interesting how Bob is to say it's like, well, yeah, like a lot of people have their own vices. If it's not substances, it's booze. Like there's a number of ways to just kind of decide to deal with escapism, and also like Bob would go to the extreme route of like, well, yeah, gun to the head, yeah. So the next thing we see here is a guy named Tom who's a pastor. He'll go on and he'll make his way into this building and he'll meet up with Bob. So Bob and Tom, they all of a sudden bump back into one another, and Bob is looking at hey, Father Murphy, and so Tom is to turn like, excuse me? Oh yeah, Bob, yeah, hey, yeah. So the two of them are to go on and kind of have this bit of dialogue between one another. and kind of have Tom kind of give us this backstory here. And Tom goes on and asks, like, "Hey, I'm feeling a little sick right now. Do you have anything to fix me up?" And Bob ends up saying, "Nope." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I'm doing this whole 21-day thing." So it's really interesting also how the character who's played by Tom, when they do the whole making of the thing, like he'll go on and he'll talk about kind of his certain time period, about how kind of drugs were seemingly more readily available, and he'll kind of also go on to repeat the same things that eventually he goes on to state within the movie about like how, like when he would go to prison, how people would just kind of give him morphine and stuff like that, just easily readily available, it seems. So that is kind of just an interesting bit of just like how things have really changed over time. So both Bob and Tom leave here. So Tom is giving Bob kind of the lay of the land and talking about artwork and things of that nature, and talking about the neighborhood, seeing where there could possibly be uh, the next shot shot for something, and what could be next. Uh, it's kind of interesting how they also are to go on and have the two of them talk about them going to heaven, because of course this guy's a pastor, but still, like, we have Bob that's saying how Tom is such a guy the way he is, that if anything he's kind of bought his way into the next life. And also, we have Tom at one point turning to Bob and say, like, "Well, hey, like the thing that you've done for me today, like, if anything, will get you to heaven, if you were to die." So the next thing we see is Bob going to this drill bit area, and he's to have to learn how to do this job, or he's just drilling holes into these things. And so that's kind of his medial job, his kind of 9 to 5. So Bob goes on and he goes to these meetings where they're all to go on and talk about them robbing or stealing or selling anything that they need to do just that way they can get their fix. And it is kind of really interesting how Bob is to go on and say that when he would steal, he would go directly to the source, which is to be a pharmacy. And another guy would relate to it as like, oh yeah, like, so if you're going to go on and realize that you need money, you would rob a bank. So it'd be kind of the same thing. So Bob goes on and makes his way back to his place to meet with Gentry. The two of them are going on and they're having a bit of conversation here. And Bob is to go on and explain to Gentry how he's cleaned himself up. And Gentry's kind of a little bit surprised. And eventually, like, Gentry is to go on and like, well, I hope that you'll go on and you'll live up to like your what you're saying here, and and kind of straighten up. So The next thing we see here is Bob going on and continue on through his day to day, his drill bit job, and his meetings, and eventually Bob will bump into David, who's going on and he's squeezing this guy as he's having an argument with somebody. So Bob goes on and stops David from getting into this argument with somebody. He's like, "Hey man, why are you arguing with this guy? Like, if anything, yeah, you're treating him bad, this and that." So David is like, "Well, hey, it's business." So eventually, this is to kind of foreshadow the fact that since David had been treated poorly by Bob, that David is going to go on and find Bob because he knows that he probably has still drugs on him somehow or another, and David is going to want to go on and try to steal from Bob whatever kind of stash he has, so he can, of course, uh, make money off of him, and or either that or just realize that Bob is kind of David's competition. So if anything, why not just kill Bob? So that way it kind of is one less person left in the world. But anyways, as well as also Bob immediately knowing who David was, even though he's wearing a mask. Anyways, so Bob goes on and meets up with Tom here, and they talk about the old days. And here's where they go on and they talk about the whole morphine in the arm with the jail and what have you. And Bob is kind of theorizing that there's a possibility that the authorities, the police, are going to go on and actually focus more on having like a narcotics division in the future and focus on having just a specific certain kind of police that are just focusing on on trying to prevent people from getting into more drugs. So Bob goes on and eventually makes his way back to his place, and there's a knock on his door, and he continues to ask who is it, and there's no answer. Bob goes to the door, opens it, and realizes Diane's there. So the two of them are to kind of have like a kind of a catch up, mostly on Bob's side of like, well, hey, what's going on with you? Bob goes on and mentions about how he's just kind of having this boring, mundane drill bit job, and eventually Diane is to give Bob a bag of drugs and just say, hey, like if you ever get that itch again, here's some drugs for you to go on and just have just in case. Uh, we would also have Diane go on and explain how she ended up with Rick, and the two of them are kind of running off together to continue doing this bit of job. Because if anything, Bob was hoping that him and Diane like could just spend a night together, and Bob wanted to tell Diane, hey, yeah, tell the friends you're with that you're just gonna leave them to stay the night with me. And Diane is like, yeah, about that. I'm gonna go on and end up with Rick because if anything, the two of us are together, and you know how I don't go on and I fool around or cheat around with other people while I'm with somebody. So yeah, like I just wanted to come here just to see how you were, just to see if you're gonna go back into your old ways. But yeah, it doesn't seem like that. So like I think this is just kind of goodbye between the two of them. So even when Bob does go on and kiss Diane, there's gonna be nothing really there as Diane just kind of walks away from Bob. Shortly thereafter that, we have Bob that makes his way to Tom's place and hands him all of these drugs, and it's like, hey, here you go. Like, I'm not going to take any of these, but I found somebody who gave me these, so here's a gift to you. Because if Bob is not going to take them, then I guess somebody has to, I guess, to either sell them or do something with them. So, after that, Bob makes his way back to his apartment to be thwarted or be seemingly be held at gunpoint by David. They go on and they beat up David or they beat up Bob. David goes on of like, hey man, where's the drugs? Where's the stuff? We know you got something on you. So Bob is to say it's like, no, I'm in a program. Like, I kicked this stuff, and if anything, he's kind of laughing at him. So the more and more they're hoping that they can get something out of him, the more they realize that this is pointless. We have a neighbor that is going on and kind of overhearing the commotion as she's kind of putting her ear to the wall. So it seems that this neighbor is to seem to be a person that is acting upon what's going on here and calling an ambulance and probably the authorities and what have you. So David is to go on and eventually realize that what they're doing here is kind of fruitless, and that if they're not going to give, or if Bob is not going to give up these drugs or anything of any kind, then David is to just say like, well, hey, you know what? How about we just kill Bob? Like, seems like the most sense. Like, this guy probably already knows who we are and everything. So David decides to shoot Bob and then leaves. We have the neighbor that pokes her head at the door, makes her way to Bob's place, realizes that he's down on the ground. So the next thing we see is Bob getting stretchered out to this community ambulance, which seemed to be interesting to see that. So Gentry has made his way to Bob's bedside and is going on and asking him, like, hey, who is the one that shot you? It doesn't really seem that Bob is giving up any real answers. Weirdly, he's going on and telling Diane about like, Bob goes on to tell Gentry that Diane should be aware about the whole hat thing. And Gentry is taking that of what Bob is saying as like, oh, so some guy named the Hat killed you? And so Bob was like, no, 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 no. Like, that's not who did it. So Gentry is just asking Bob, well, hey, who did it then? I need to know. And Bob never really says. So he goes on and he leaves and he goes into the ambulance. And so the last thing we go on and we see here is Bob going on and just kind of talking about this whole effing life. You never know what's gonna happen next. That's why Nadine spiked herself with the easy way out. Most people don't know how they're gonna feel from one minute to the next. All you gotta do is look at the labels on the little bottles. You gotta show how to read the signs. That's what the hat on the bed was, which is why I'm not scared. The irony was effing brilliant. The cops were giving me a escort to the fattest pharmacy in town. I was still alive, Hope they can keep me that way. So Bob is possibly thinking that he's probably going to go on and maybe steal from this pharmacy and maybe go back to the way he was or die. And then we end up getting a credits roll here where we're just seeing a number of people within the cast that are all just kind of running around. And it's just a lot of just nonsensical, just like, okay, we're just seeing something to just kind of take up the background of this credit scene. Like, I started to watch it for a couple of minutes until I realized that there's nothing really to this credit scene and it just kind of just dropped off. So if anything, if there was really anything from this credit scene, then I guess I missed out. But otherwise, I just kind of felt that it was nothing. So, with that said, thank you for going on and watching this. This will be another upload today. This is actually fantastic because I think I was not going to be awake enough, coherent enough, or whatever enough to be able to do this. But surprisingly, I was able to somehow muster a way to somehow talk about this film, even though logically also I kind of question everything that I've gone on to say also. But if anything, I always realized that nothing as far as review can ever be perfect. Or also, I'm just happy that I got this done so I can turn around and be happy that this is to kind of to just be covered for my day so I can kind of go on and do other things and also get some sleep. So thank you for going on and watching this. I really do appreciate it. I really am honest when I and I always say that, but just yeah, I thank you everybody for going on and watching this content because it seems that people are actually doing that lately. Uh it seems that there is quite often a number of just surprises that are seemingly to occur with some of these bits of content where people are actually going on and checking them out. And there are some that are just kind of doing way better than I thought they would. And I'm just grateful. So I hope the best for everyone's holiday season. I'm exactly saying when exactly this is coming out. And thank you all for going on and having the best possible date that you can. I'm gonna get that guy out of here because I have no idea what I'm saying. Anyways, goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.